I just find it extraordinary that at least us have not been given some private briefing as to exactly what has happened, but more importantly, what measures have been taken to make sure there are no others out there, what information may have been gleaned by this individual. In fact, I mean, I've found out more about this individual now from my son, who just happened to be at university with him, than
Oh,
I have from people who might want to tell me a bit more because of my job.
Tim Loughton, good morning to you.
Morning, Asma.
When did you first find out about this?
Over the weekend, when the headlines appeared in the newspaper, completely out of the blue. And as one of those who's been sanctioned, I would have hoped we might have had the courtesy of a tip-off that something was being investigated at the very least, but absolutely nothing.
What's your understanding of why you weren't told?
Well, I don't know. And that's why I and the various of my colleagues who are in a similar position have written to the Speaker to ask for an urgent question this afternoon to get some explanation here. I mean, there are so many questions unanswered because of this. First of all, what steps have the parliamentary authorities been taken? Because it was about a year ago we had the Chinese spy connection in Barry Gardner's office. We were eventually given a briefing after that and told that security was going to be certainly spruced up. Then we find out over the weekend that in fact this arrest didn't happen just the last few days as we suspected, but actually earlier in the year. So who knew what when? What discussions have gone on between ministers and Chinese officials to haul them up over this one? Because the Prime Minister took it up with the Premier from China at the G20 summit as if this is something that had just happened, and it's not. So we've got a lot of questions to put forward, both to the parliamentary authorities and to government ministers as well. And it really is not remotely appropriate that those of us most in the firing line, who've been sanctioned by China, under threat by China, have not been given some briefing about exactly what's happened. The first I knew about it when the story was broken in the Sunday Times.
And I presume that you've been in touch with other MPs then who've been sanctioned by China. Is there a WhatsApp group devoted just to this?
There is. There's a sanctioned MPs WhatsApp group involving MPs sanctioned throughout the world as well. And just last weekend, I was in Prague along with Ian Duncan Smith, Bob Seeley, and parliamentarians from around the world talking about the threat from China and lobbying governments to take it more seriously and do more about it. So this is a very live issue, and I just find it extraordinary that at least us have not been given some private briefing as to exactly what has happened, but more importantly, what measures have been taken to make sure there are no others out there, what information may have been gleaned by this individual. In fact, I mean, I've found out more about this individual now from my son, who just happened to be at university with him, than I have from people who might want to tell me a bit more because of my job.
Goodness me, that's quite the revelation. Clearly, so there are questions to answer about why you weren't told. What about the name of this individual? Obviously, the Sunday Times, the Times have named him, as is Times Radio. Is that helpful to you?
Well, I did find out the name before it was published, and it's an individual I know of. I never had anything to do with. He was part of the China research group, which various colleagues did set up, but I was part of all sorts of groups warning about China well before that, because I've been chairing the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Tibet for many years. So I was in China's sights for some time. But no, this individual clearly had parliamentary clearance, had a parliamentary pass as a parliamentary researcher, which allows you to access various parliamentary networks, which allows you to an extent to spy on other people working within parliaments, gain access to offices, gain access to meetings, maybe confidential meetings where colleagues have been meeting, which was the problem with the Barry Gardner connection before. Exactly what meetings, what access, what networks, what data could that person have had access to? And here's somebody who could well have had access to even more things than before. But we need to know exactly the implications of it.
Just on that point then, finally, about vetting and security clearance and all the rest of it. I mean, most people would have an understanding that when you get a job like this, There are certain processes that you have to go through. But then, subsequent to that, if you were to decide, talking hypothetically, that you might want to do something like this, is in what way? How would that be discovered subsequently?
A very good question, and one of the many questions I'm sure we'll put this afternoon. I mean, here was somebody who had spent time out in China as well, which should flag up further scrutiny, presumably. There is a problem here. This person got security clearance, was working in Parliament before the Barry Gardiner affair last year, before the heightened concerns about Chinese spying. But there needs to be an ongoing process to be able to go back to say, well, hold on, have all those people who've got clearance have access to information in this sort of area? Can we still rely on them? And there's a bit of an irony here, Asma, as well. Certain MPs offered to take on interns who had fled Hong Kong through one of the Hong Kong support organizations. I interviewed and was due to take a young Chinese student on earlier this year. When it came to get security clearance from the parliamentary authorities, they were refused on the basis that they'd not been in the UK for at least 3 years and came from China. Now, that suggested that the security clearance procedures have been strengthened. The irony is it actually captured somebody who's on the right side, having failed to capture somebody who sided with China and would do us harm. So all this needs to be sorted out. It's a mess, and we are due and owed at least an explanation of what's going on and what's going to be done in the future to make sure we're protected and all our colleagues in Parliament are protected as well.
Okay, Tim Loughton, thank you for speaking to us. That's a Conservative MP, Tim Loughton.